Good morning, everyone. Good to have you with us today. Kathy and I are here to share a story about my past.
Morning.
So this is a story that I've shared many times with Kathy over the years, and it just at the outset of the possibility of sharing it again, it always gives me a pause because it's well, as it unfolds, I think you'll understand why. When I was in 7th grade at a Catholic grammar school in Wilton Manors, Florida, which is a suburb of Fort Lauderdale, I was working with a priest who had just come over from Ireland. We'll call him Father Jim. He was very enthusiastic and very involved with kids in the school. And I had actually volunteered earlier to help him with some things in the parish. I believe all I remember about it was I was supposed to go over there and help him fold papers, and so we worked together pretty well over about 6 months. And then when I was in the altar servers, I had been elected to be one of the leaders, one of the 4 officers for the altar servers, and he determined that during Holy Week, the 4 officers would be on for Holy Week services. Now, in the Catholic Church, the big events of Holy Week include a Holy Thursday, the Mass of the Lord's Supper, and then, of course, there's Good Friday, and then the Easter Vigil. We're going to focus on what happened to me on Holy Thursday night. I was the tallest of the altar servers, and of course, I was one of the officers, so I got to hold the cross. I got to be the cross bearer that night. Now, if memory serves, the thing that reminded me of this every year, reminds me of this every year, is when I actually train altar servers to do the same thing for the parish that I'm involved with right now. And I always hearken back to what happened to me during that time, and I think you'll see as it unfolds why I do that.
Dan, I've heard the story many times, and every time I hear the story, there's a new question that comes to me. Mm-hmm. And a question that's come to me just even now before you dive into the story itself. I'm wondering, what was it that drew you to volunteer to work with Father Jim in an extraordinary, extra special way? What drew you? Was it to him? Was it to the work? Was it to something else? What was it?
You know, that's an interesting question because I've not thought about that. Well, I think we're telling this story like 4 times, 4th time now, and you're right. Every time something new pops out. All I remember is that I lived within biking distance of the church, and I can remember, and at that time it was safe to do that, to drive, take your bicycle and go to church, and I would serve funerals or serve mass, and he just seemed to be an appealing kind of guy. I guess he was young. The other priests in the parish were much older, and he seemed very enthusiastic about doing things, and the pastor gave him permission to get involved in various things. So I think that's probably why I saw the enthusiasm. I wanted to be part of that.
And I just heard something else that I hadn't heard before. It was safe to go to the church on your bike.
Right. Yeah. Today, it's a different story. Today, you wouldn't want to be out on a bicycle driving along, and I mean, I had encounters with drivers back in those days, and this one guy asked for directions, and I said, well, it's very easy you can just turn the street, go down a couple blocks. He said, no, why don't you just get in the car with me and take me there? And I said, no, it's okay, it's fine. This is the way you go down the street. I had no idea what he was asking me. And I think God protected me that day, because he just looked at me in a kind of a gruntled way and just drove off. So in those days, things could happen, but maybe the Lord blessed me and protected me from that sort of thing. But I felt safe enough to go and work with him at the church at the time.
You weren't in a bubble.
No.
You weren't in a bubble, and yet you had that sense of, as I'm hearing it from you now, not only the safety of the culture at that time for a kid in your circumstance, but also the safety of God's being in this work that you were doing there in the congregation, that God was a participant, a partner in getting you back and forth. God wanted you there.
Yeah, somehow. Not sure how, but somehow it worked that way. So he had, you know, and I have no memory of a rehearsal for this Mass, which I do all the time now. I no memory of that at all. Maybe it's because of what happened has wiped out memory of that. But I'll take you to the actual incident now. We're on the altar at this church, which is shaped like a shoebox. And at the end of Holy Thursday, we always took the Blessed Sacrament or the Eucharist from the altar in procession to a separate location so that it gives the impression that the Lord has left the building in a sense, and our bride, the bridegroom Christ, has been taken from us. So that makes Holy Thursday and Good Friday, actually, like Good Friday, a much more poignant experience when the tabernacle doors are empty and you come into an empty church with an empty tabernacle. So that happens at the end of Holy Thursday. So the signal that I received was when the priest covers the ciborium, which is the container for the hosts on the altar, when the priest covers the ciborium with this veil called the humeral veil and turns, that begins the procession. Well, I saw what I thought was this gesture of covering the ciborium and turning. And so I just took the cross, turned around, and by the way, I should have told you that I'm leading maybe 15 other altar servers in this procession. So I go to the back of the church near the main doors and I turn them around and I look to my horror that the priest had not left the sanctuary. I had somehow missed the cue and they were still there. So the sweat started to pour off my forehead. The servers behind me, seeing what I had done, are taunting me, saying, "Why? Oh my God, this is terrible. Why? What happened? How did you misread that?" That's all I can recall. And I see the priest coming down the center aisle without a procession. And this one priest, who was a Polish priest, not a very nice person, looked at me, laughed at me. The priest in the middle, who was the pastor, he could care less. He really couldn't care less. But Father Jim, who was on the other side, he sort of stared at me. So they finally got behind the line of the procession, and I started to take them over to the side altar, where the Eucharist would be kept, not the tabernacle and behind the main altar, but on the side. The next memory I have is me sitting in my father's tan 1964 Chevrolet Malibu, which we had just bought a few years before. And the door was open and I was sitting there, and Father Jim came up to me and angrily said to me, "You will never be on for services again." And it was very painful. And it was funny because a couple of times in telling the story, I wondered why my father never reacted to this. And then I remembered that he was hard of hearing and he never heard it. He never heard it at all. So I was quite devastated by that. And again, the memory, just the rest of the memory is wiped away. I remember the next thing that happened was I go home and talk to my mother about it, and I think my mother was rather upset because she could be very upset about these things. I don't think anybody ever did anything about it, but I do know that a year later I was not on for services again, as he told me that night. I was not going to be on for services again. So that's the first part of the story. Did you hear anything else, Kath?
Yes, I did. I noticed hearing the story this time that as you were preparing to tell it, you foreshadowed twice that there's something in this story that is triggering. Something in the story is a trauma memory.
Yes.
It's that there are pieces of it that are missing, that there are pieces of it that bring a change in your tone of voice.
Yes.
So as your listener, if I'm listening to what's not said, if I'm listening to the spaces in your narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing before you tell the story that I'm perhaps hearing a trauma memory, which is a pastoral moment
Mm-hmm.
where the boundary between researcher and pastor come together. And I'm reminded that it's my responsibility as the listener to keep that boundary intact, because the story is yours to tell, mine to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a reflection of something that we pastors are taught. Pastoral leaders are taught to talk a lot,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
but the actual ministry is in the listening. If I had talked over you, I would not have heard the foreshadowing. I might have been unprepared as your listener for what came next. And you didn't foreshadow on purpose. That's just
That's right.
the way a
It just pops
story
up.
unfolds.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way a story unfolds. Well, something I heard today in this first part of the story that I heard in a new way, in a more theological way, today. I just want to check this out with you to see, as you came down, back down the aisle, believing that you had seen the priest's story. You were in the community. You had your role, you had your position, you had your task, you had others with you. You were in the embrace of the community. And you got to the back of the sanctuary, and it sounded to me as if you were suddenly alone.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
It
That's
wasn't. It
exactly
was
right. Yes.
alone.
It was
And the thing,
like the world shrank. I can still see it. The world just shrank to a focus on that altar, and why the signal was given in a confused manner or whatever. Whether it was given or I picked it up, it was just completely missed. So, yeah.
and your friends, the other altar servers, were no help. They were basically blaming the victim.
That's right. No help at all.
The Other than the middle priest in the procession,
Mm-hmm.
who thought it was no big deal, you were at the receiving end of the ire.
Yes.
Of Father Jim, and you aren't important enough. It sounded to me as if the first priest in the procession was, well, whatever it wasn't important enough to him to even matter that you were there completely alone. None of them reached to you in their pastoral roles.
Correct. That's right. None of them, not even the pastor who could care less. He just blew it off, really.
He
Kind of
blew
a
it
thing.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And his opportunity to reach out to you as your pastor, he walked right by.
That's right.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm thinking myself in telling the story, knowing a little bit more about this process, and if we are referring to the Hester Walker Jones book, both he and she, the authors, talk about what's lying on the cutting room floor. The stories that, the pieces of the stories that we forget or we leave behind, sometimes we're able to find them in the retelling and put them back in place. One of the things that I always wondered about this, and I'm kind of afraid to go to talk to Father Jim, who's in his 80s now and retired. I go to lunch with him and ask him, so was I kind of like a smart aleck kind of a server at that time, and was that a phase in that I'm not hearing in this story? I'm kind of afraid to ask that because I really don't know what the answer would be at this point. So that's one aspect of the thing. I really should do this, ask him, but I don't know if I'm ready for that yet.
If you're ready for it.
Yeah. Because of what happened in the rest of the story. This is a 10-year arc of a story. So let me just go on and see what we can,
see what comes.
what we'll discover in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
So at that, the year after that, it was 8th grade when I was not put on for services. And after that, I decided to enter the Catholic seminary to study for the priesthood. This was in the days when you would have a high school seminary, a junior college, and a graduate school. So I was going to be in the seminary for 12 years. And so I started in first year high school, and coincidentally, Father Jim was asked to go to study in Rome to teach moral theology. So he was going to go back to teach in our seminary system when he finished getting his degree. So we kind of had parallel journeys at this time, and I finished the seminary in Miami, which was high school and junior college, and then I was sent to the seminary in Boynton Beach, Florida, which was going to be senior college and graduate school. So meanwhile, I am dreading the fact that he is going to be my moral theology professor when I finally get to that level in the seminary. So when we finally get to that level and I'm in his class for the first time, it was not really a problem. It was kind of a easy transition, and he's the professor and I'm the student, and it's moral theology, which is kind of ironic considering where this story has begun. And actually I'm wringing my hands right now, recalling the kind of like sitting there in front of him and wondering what's it going to be like. So the second year, second theology, he offered a class called metanoia, which in Greek, of course, means forgiveness. And he taught this class. He was very forward-looking for his time. He taught the class by renting movies and putting them on an old-fashioned Bell and Howell projector and showing films and that had a moral dilemma that needed to be considered by the class. It was a seminar, so there were only 7 or 8 of us in the class. As an example, he showed the clip from the Hitchcock movie Lifeboat, and the point was, should people be going over the side so that a number of them could be saved, and so on. And one week, the film didn't arrive. Not like today where you could download it, but the actual film reel didn't arrive. So he didn't want to cancel class, so he just went around the room and he said, look, let's just talk about why you wanted to be a priest. What was the origin of your vocation? So I thought to myself, it's now or never. I got to share my story about what happened so many years before. So we went around the room and the other students told their story, and finally it got to me, and I said, I'm going to share a story, not necessarily about why I wanted to become a priest, but something that happened between Father Jim and myself. So I started to tell the story, and I was starting to feel pretty self-righteous because I am going to stick it to my professor here. And I got more animated as I told the story. And I would look at him, and he had his head down throughout the entire time. He just had his head down listening to the story. And when I finally got to the end of the story, I looked up and I looked at him. He still had his head down. And I said, and Father Jim, over 10 years, I was dreading being a student in your class. And he looked up at me and he said, Dan, over the last 10 years, I was dreading having you as a student in my class because of what I did to you. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And it still affects me to this very day when
Mm-hmm.
I say what he said to me then. It was an amazing experience of healing and forgiveness that it really changed my life, because before that time, that experience destroyed my sense of self-confidence for many, many years. I was always second guessing. And after that, it changed. And
Mm-hmm.
every year when I rehearse altar servers for that Holy Thursday procession, I always tell them, look over your shoulder and make sure that the priest is right behind you. And they don't know why I'm saying that, but that's what I do. So an arc of 10 years. Wow. I can't believe every time I tell it, it's a whole different layer, and
Mm-hmm.
the feelings race back. It's like I was there. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You come right back to it.
they come right back to
Yeah,
it.
you come right back to it.
Yeah.
Uh, 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 Something that came to me, an image that came to me, and I want to check this out with you as I listen to you tell the story this time. Your aloneness, standing at the back of the sanctuary, sitting in the car and having your father do nothing. In that liturgical moment, the image that that came to me was Jesus on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me?
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
I thought I heard forsakenness. Does that fit for you?
It does fit. It does fit because it's a sense of being completely alone in the moment. You know, it's almost if it was filmed. You know, you could see the tunnel vision, and then the camera would zoom in on the priests still up at the altar, and you know, as they rush back. There's a scene in Ratatouille. I don't know if you've seen it, but when he tastes the ratatouille and the camera races back,
yes,
to his childhood, and then he comes. Then after he tastes the ratatouille, it comes back.
Yes,
That's the kind of image I have of what that moment was like in my mind's eye from that time.
almost like it's out of time. Out of time.
It's almost out of time. It really is. It really is. And I've never been in war, but I kind of have a little sense of being traumatized by this moment. And I can only imagine what it would be like to be in battle and watching your friends being killed on either side and feeling perhaps alone and maybe guilty about surviving this kind of thing. You know, and I don't know much about PTSD, and I'm not saying this is anywhere near what they go through, but it's still a trauma experience for a kid who's in 7th grade. So
I can imagine in ministry today, it's not the trauma of war, but the trauma of pandemic.
Yes,
is
correct.
going to be a part of ministerial practice. And I want to check something out with you. I know in your ministry, your title, what is your title there at your church?
Well, the title is Director of Liturgy and Music. You know, I've always shied away from director. I'd rather be a coordinator of same, you know, but that's what I do at the parish. But I've gotten into other things like adult education, Bible study through Zoom, organizing a 14-year-old film series. So it's been a broadening experience just to organize things beyond the liturgy and music.
You've placed yourself as the title that you don't want or the title that you do want. Either way,
yeah,
you have placed yourself in a more pastoral role than either of those titles would imply.
it seems to be, yes.
And I wonder, does that failure, abject failure of pastoral ministry that you were at the receiving end of, does that inform your ministry now?
It does, in many ways. It does. I try to be a connector of people. I try to be a if I could stop the tape now and redo it and cut that part out, but we can't. A facilitator of communication with people, which I didn't experience in that moment. So it has helped me to turn that moment around so that it can never happen again. Someone told me that a while ago that when the whole thing about metanoia or forgiveness is that, you know, the term forgive and forget. It was a mission priest that said that. It's like you can forgive, but you don't forget. And the reason you don't forget is so that you'll remember not to do the same thing to somebody else down the line. So I think that's probably one thing that drives my ministry is remember what happened, let it go, but try not to perpetrate it down the line, which I think is the problem with a lot of abuse issues. You know, they say that if you're abusing somebody, it's because you were abused in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is the thing, and I worked with in the seminary. They told us that there's a reason why certain pastors are irascible and not easy to get along with. And you know, this one priest said they don't plan to do that. You don't set out to be that way. Things happen, and you end up trying to repeat the past, I guess, somehow. So that's been an answer to your question, is trying to avoid the pain that I experienced by making other people's lives a little more easy to live.
For me today, hearing it, the moral of the story that I'm hearing today is that by your stripes, all those people are healed, including Pastor Jim, Father Jim.
Including him, yeah, because we're fast friends now. I mean, I see him at various events, and we just get along great.
Mm-hmm.
But someday I've got to open that can up again, if I ever get the courage, and ask him what his memory of it is, because I've told it many times, written it out. I've even written it up as an article, but it's just, and that's a different layer when you write it out and you look at it. It's a different way of looking at a certain scenario. You know, I teach you this. I'm sure you, Kathy, and all the people who are watching this have been through theological reflection, where or clinical pastoral education, where you have a ministerial moment and you have to write it up. And usually it's from memory, without any notes, because you can't sit there during the session. Excuse me, let me just take some notes down as to our engagement. And you just have to do it by memory. And when you write out, when I wrote the story out, it was a whole different way of looking at it. So
one of our resources, I think it's Michelle, talks about that the power of hearing one's words spoken back, which is what this process does, and the power of writing and seeing and hearing one's words written. But with the power of storytelling, the power of storytelling is that it equalizes the listener and the teller at this point, until you invite him to tell his side of the story, if you will. Who has the power in your relationship with Father Jim now?
That's a good question. I have no idea. It's like we're still dancing around it, because it happened. We had that healing moment. I don't even know if he remembers the healing moment. He probably would. I think he probably sees me and says, "Oh God, here he comes again." But we know that we're on a different footing now. Actually, I should tell you that there was one time when I was in another later class with him. I had forgotten that there was a final exam. So I went into this class and took this final exam without having studied for it, flunked it. And I mean, I was going to fail the class, because the test, well, I mean, what does that say about his planning? One test is going to fail a student, right?
Yeah.
That's another layer.
Interesting pedagogy.
Yeah. So like an idiot, I didn't feign sickness and just bail the class. I just sat there and took the test, and so as a consequence, he was kind enough to allow me to write a paper that summarized the class, and I ended up with a C in the class, which destroyed my GPA, and I wasn't able to be the valedictorian that year. So not a humbling experience, but the same priest. But he was kind enough to allow me to find a way to pass the course. So that happened later on. That's another layer you have never heard, Cass.
I've never heard that layered. It's as if he had the opportunity, when you failed the test, to redeem his assignment of the F all those years before.
Yeah. And one more corollary to that is that when I finished the paper and brought it to him, I was so arrogant those days. I took the paper and I said, "This is how you should teach your class." Boom. Isn't that terrible?
Do you think there might have been a little residual anger still in place?
Yes. Yes, a little bit, just a hair, you know. Oh my gosh. So
I wonder where Father Jim would say right now the power lies
yeah, I
in your
wonder.
relationship. I
I
wonder.
would think that he and I might agree that it's mutual. It's in both of our hands because of his openness, my openness to be able to tell the story in front of classmates.
Yes, yes,
In,
big
in
risk.
which was an ostensibly a way to get back at him. And I can
Mhm.
remember, I think I remember folding my arms when I finally said to him, and I was terrified to be in your class. And then I was blown out of the water when
Yeah,
he had the same reaction to
he
me.
had dreaded it.
Yeah, he
That
had
he had
dreaded
dreaded
it
it too.
as much as for the
Yeah.
same period of time. Every time he would see me at the parish functions or something or other, he would think about what happened, and never,
Mhm.
neither of us had the courage or the guts to share it. But in the context of a class on forgiveness, it gave a safe
In
space where
that
we could do it.
moment. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. In that moment.
in that moment, yeah, pretty
Well,
amazing.
thank you. Thank you for telling me your story. I learned something new about you and about life and about ministry every time I am privileged, blessed to listen to it.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks for allowing me to do it. That's great. Okay, wonderful.
Well, folks, Dan and I have just demonstrated the narrative research methodology called story brokering. In some authors, it's curating. But
Hmm.
the term that we learned when we were in your position as students was story brokering. Dan has told a story of a childhood memory, and I have thickened the narrative by asking curious questions, and you have overheard our curating of Dan's narrative. And you might be wondering what the purpose of this methodology is, and the resources that were assigned for this topic explain more about the theory and the practice, the theology and the practice of narrative research. And so we want to commend to you, in addition to the resources that were assigned on the syllabus, a resource that's available to you now. It's got a very simple title, Notes for Video Clip 6/24/2020. And if you will check into that paper, Notes for Video Clip, it will be a roadmap to take you through the resources that we assign for our topic. So thanks to all of you in the overhearing position for participating in our story today.
And thank you, Kathy.
Thank
God
you,
bless.
Dan.
Okay.
God bless you too. Bye-bye.